Hey everyone, hope you're having a good day. Today I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome, which is a little bit more sad than usual of a topic, but I figured because I talked about a lot of the aspects of software engineering, it was only right to share the bad parts as well as the good parts. So before we talk about my experience specifically with imposter syndrome, I want to first nail down the definition of imposter syndrome for this video. The term gets thrown around a lot, and I'm sure people have a lot of different definitions for it, but the definition that I generally go with is feeling like the job that you got or the accolades that you got, they feel like they're unwarranted or that they were given mistakenly, and if the person giving you that job or those accolades knew more about you, knew more about your skills, that they wouldn't have given you those achievements and you only got them because maybe they don't know the full story. Basically, it's the feeling that what you've achieved isn't deserved by you. And imposter syndrome is a pretty serious thing in software engineering. During my research, I read a couple different articles that talked about the number of people in the tech industry that have experienced imposter syndrome in one way or another is over 55%. And as you can tell, I am one of those people. During my research, I was also pretty curious about how the different forms of imposter syndrome can manifest, and there was one article that outlined it really well, and I want to share some of the potential causes of imposter syndrome. One of them is the disappointed genius. Tech workers, at least in my very biased opinion, are smart people, and I think for good reason. In the tech industry, in order to succeed, you can't just be mediocre. In Peter Thiel's book 0 to 1, he talks about how in order to succeed, your product has to be 10 times more valuable than the nearest competitor, or provide something relatively different from the competitor that also provides much more value. Now, in the book, Thiel talks about entrepreneurship and creating products in general, but he's also been very involved in the tech industry throughout his career, so I think his words are meant to be taken even more seriously in the tech world. So then, if you're working in tech, it stands to reason that the workers in those tech companies need to be very high level, innovative, all those cliche words that you can think of to describe smart people. The only thing is, when you take a smart person who's been the smartest person or one of the smartest people in their lives ever since they were born and surround them with other very smart, innovative people, they may find themselves to be only average or slightly above or below average, and then because they're not used to feeling that way, perceive themselves in a much worse light than normal. This, in addition to the challenges that working in software engineer can often provide people, given that it's a field of work that often requires a lot of brain power to do it, can cause people to suffer from feelings of inadequacy or imposter syndrome. Another source of imposter syndrome that's easier to understand is feeling underqualified. Tech is a constantly evolving field. There's so much innovation happening with the products and just in the way of making tech workers work more efficiently through things like new languages, new libraries, new frameworks. As a result, tech workers need to be constantly evolving and learning throughout their career in order to keep their market value high. Because of the constant learning that's required for these tech jobs, it's easy to feel underqualified, especially when there's so many different things that you could potentially know. It's easy to feel overwhelmed and as though your sphere of knowledge is not enough. Okay. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about my specific experience with imposter syndrome. First off, of the two sources that I listed about imposter syndrome earlier on in the video, my imposter syndrome primarily came from the underqualified reason. I'm an information systems student, and for my first 3 semesters at Carnegie Mellon, I was still a business student. In high school, I didn't pass the computer science AP tests, and by the end of my freshman year, all I'd taken was the introductory CS class, a class that a lot of CS majors don't even take because they've already passed it in high school. When I first joined Amazon as an intern after my sophomore year, I'd still only taken a couple core classes. I literally felt like an imposter, like someone who didn't deserve to be working at Amazon and only got the internship there because I'd studied an abnormal amount of leak code in the months prior, and in reality didn't know the first thing about software engineering. It also didn't help that the friends that I was surrounded by at Carnegie Mellon were taking a lot harder classes than I was and excelled in the classes that I struggled in. I thought that once my internship started and I had to do real work for once instead of leak code, that I'd be exposed for not having any technical know-how. And after that, I'd have to switch career paths. My first weeks at my first internship with Amazon were the roughest. I've told this story in one of my first videos, but on my first day of my first internship, I had a meeting at 11 a.m. set up with my manager to go ahead and set up my computer and my work environment. I couldn't start onboarding until I'd met with my manager and he got my computer set up, and because the meeting was already at 11 a.m., that meant I had 2 hours where I wasn't able to do anything on my first day. To make matters worse, my manager pushed the meeting back another 3 hours until 2 p.m., so I had a total of 5 hours on my first first day that I couldn't get any work done. I was so worried during that time that I couldn't do anything, just panicking so much, feeling so worried about falling behind the other interns. And remember, I already felt underqualified to them. So now with this additional setback, I figured it'd be way harder for me to catch up. I can't remember the last time I panicked so hard at anything. You know, looking back, obviously this had no impact on my internship whatsoever, but it's hard to really know that in the moment and when you don't have the benefit of hindsight. Later on in my first week, I was asked to do some research into some AWS services that could help my project, looking into things like potential database services and potential services to host my project on, and look at a couple of the different performance metrics and costs associated with each service to determine which one would be best for my project. And honestly, I'd never done something like this before, so of course I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't really know what I was looking at or what any of the metrics meant, which made me feel even more that I didn't belong and that I was out of my depth at this internship. So then, how did I manage to deal with my imposter syndrome? I want to make it very clear that I say deal with my imposter syndrome and not solved or cured, because it's not something that's completely gone away even today. As I said before, I'm not a computer science major. I haven't taken as many CS classes as some of my friends have, and I'm scared that when I start my full-time job, maybe I won't be qualified enough and that I'll fail. Anyways, back to my first internship. My imposter syndrome faded a lot as the weeks went on throughout my internship. How? Because I executed. So my project had a set of base goals, the ones that most interns are expected to complete, as well as stretch goals, which are completed after you complete your base goals and maybe you have some more time to get some more work done. I completed all of them, and every time that I completed a goal, I felt a little bit more confident in my abilities and the doubt faded a little bit more. Every goal that I completed was kind of like a little piece of evidence that I had that I would be able to complete my internship and that I was capable. After the summer, I also received a return offer from Amazon to return for the next summer, which served as even more concrete proof that I was capable of being successful and that I had what it took to belong. One other thing that I did to dampen my imposter syndrome was to stop comparing myself to other people. The book, The Courage to be Disliked, talks about how all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. Basically, that means that all of our problems arise because we have relationships with other people, and some of those problems arise because we compare ourselves with those people. But if we refrain from comparing ourselves with other people, then we no longer feel those feelings associated with comparing ourselves. Both the feeling of superiority when you compare yourself with someone who's worse than you, and the feeling of inferiority when you compare yourself to someone who's better than you. Unfortunately, I still do compare myself with others. A lot of times it just kind of happens unconsciously. It's really hard not to when there are things like grades or your total compensation that are very concrete numbers that kind of determine how smart or how much market value someone has, but I don't think I do it nearly as much as before. My friends who are smarter and more achieving than I am, they're probably way harder working and therefore really deserve the success that they have. Working on internalizing that mindset and actually believing it instead of just using it to cope in order to feel better when I'm not as good as someone really changed my perspective and made me feel a lot less jealousy towards other people. Alright, that's it. That's my story with imposter syndrome and how I currently deal with it day to day. If you're a viewer with imposter syndrome, I hope this video gives you a little bit of clarity into what you can do to help deal with your own imposter syndrome. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Boom.